Hey everyone, welcome back to Greco Makes. Today I'm going to be taking you through a step-by-step tutorial to make the Saturn sling bag, which is a pattern by me. You can buy the pattern on Etsy if you don't have it already. The link will be in the description. So the Saturn sling bag comes in two sizes. There's this size, which is the large, and it's meant to fit your laptop and be a bit bigger of a shoulder bag. You could take it to a coffee shop or on a road trip, something like that. And then this is the small size. It's meant to carry like just more than the essentials, so sunglasses, a book, wallet, phone, keys, etc., and just be like a go-to day-to-day bag. Both of the sizes feature this side cinch detail here, which is optional and adjustable, so you can undo it if you'd like that. There's a front pocket here that opens to the side. And then you can choose to make your own strap, which I give instructions for in the video, or you can use webbing that you buy from the store to make your adjustable strap. So I'm going to be making this large size bag today for this tutorial. You can make the large or the small. The steps are exactly the same. If you're going to omit a feature, so for example, you're going to make the small bag and you're not going to make a laptop pocket, obviously, then you can just completely skip that section. Other than that, the steps are totally the same, but we will be making the large one. Okay, so gather your materials and we will get sewing.
So the first thing we're going to do is mark on your zipper where you want to trim. You can find the lengths that you should trim your zippers to in the instruction manual. It'll be different for the small size and large size. Here I'm going to trim both the front zipper as well as the top main zipper, just doing them both at once. And then I also remove that zipper pull just because I find it easier to sew the tabs on when the zipper pull is off, but you can feel free to leave it on if you want. So first we're going to sew the zipper tabs to that front pocket zipper, so the shorter of the two. So lay the lining zipper tab right side up on your surface, put the zipper on top, also right side up, and then put the main fabric zipper tab on top right side down. So you're sandwiching that zipper in between the two lining tabs. Then we're going to put the zipper pull back on. Make sure that the zipper pull is on the side where the main fabric tab is, not on the bottom side. And then we'll just repeat the zipper tabs on the other side. So the lining fabric tab on the bottom facing up and the main fabric tab on the top facing down. And now we'll just take that over to our machine and we'll sew across 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter away from the end of the zipper. If you're using a metal or a plastic zipper, use your hand wheel to sew over the zipper so that you don't break the needle. Okay, so once you've sewn the zipper tabs on both sides of your zipper, you want to take it over to your iron, open up those zipper tabs so that the wrong sides are together, and then give it a press. If you're using a plastic zipper, just be careful that you're not touching the zipper with your hot iron or it might melt. Now take your zipper back to your sewing machine and sew a line of top stitching through all 3 layers, so both zipper tabs and the zipper, about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters away from the seam. Again, using that hand wheel to sew through your zipper if you're using a plastic or a metal zipper. Then flip your zipper around and repeat that top stitching on the other side.
Okay, so before we sew the front pocket, we have to make a decision about where you want your front pocket to go. So the front pocket opens to the side like this, but it only covers half of the bag. So it'll either be on this side, opening like this, or it'll be on this side, opening like this. And the way you're gonna choose is that it's way more convenient for this pocket to open forwards like this when you're wearing it over one shoulder. So in the instructions, you'll see that I described something called the right shoulder method and something called the left shoulder method. So I prefer to wear my bag over the right shoulder. The pocket ends up on this side, so I'm gonna follow the right shoulder method. If you prefer to wear your bag over your left shoulder like this, then you're gonna follow the left shoulder method. Unfortunately, in the video, just because of time, I'm only gonna go over the right shoulder method that I will be following. So if you're gonna do the left shoulder method, you're gonna have to mirror all those instructions. Follow along in your instruction manual because I do give both sets of instructions there. So hopefully that'll be easier for you to follow along. But yeah.
Okay, so first we need to trim these front pocket pieces so that everything lines up nicely. So since I'm going to be making the right shoulder method bag, I'm going to trim 1 inch off of the right front main fabric piece. And then I'm going to take my front lining pieces and I'm going to trim 1 inch off of the right piece and 3/4 of an inch off the left piece. These measurements, as well as the measurements for the left shoulder method, are all in your instruction book, so please take a look there. I also highly recommend that you mark these pieces, especially if your fabric doesn't have an obvious right and wrong side, so that you can keep track of them in the coming steps. Okay, so first, take that zipper that we just prepared, and you're going to place it right sides together, so the zipper pull facing down, along the inner edge of the front right main fabric piece. I like to use clips to hold the zipper in place, but you could also use pins if you prefer. Next, take that to your sewing machine, and using your zipper foot, you're going to sew along the whole edge of that zipper. Your seam allowance should be approximately 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter with your zipper foot, but if you can't get exactly that seam allowance, depending on the width of your zipper tape, don't stress about it. At some point, you'll need to lift up the presser foot, leaving the needle down, and move the zipper pull like I'm doing here. Sometimes this can be tricky, and you might need to actually back stitch, take the needle out, move the zipper pull, and then put the needle back in. Here I was able to do it without taking the needle out, but it just depends on how close you get to your zipper. Next, you're going to line up the unsewn edge of the zipper with the inner edge of the right lining fabric piece. So just as we did with the main fabric piece, lining up the zipper, but this time your zipper will be facing up. And just as before, take that to your sewing machine, and with that zipper foot and your approximately 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance, you're going to sew along the zipper. Next, you're going to grab that left main fabric piece, and you're going to take your working piece where we've sewn on the zipper and flip it over so that the right sides of the main fabric pieces are together. And then we're going to clip or pin those inner edges together just as we did in previous steps. And you guessed it, we're going to take that over to our sewing machine, and with our zipper foot, you're going to sew with that 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance once again. What's nice here is that you can actually follow the stitch line that is already there and just sew directly over top of it. It's hard to see in this video because my thread is so light. I should have used something darker, so I apologize. But on your own piece, you'll just be able to follow that same stitch line. Again, as you can see me doing here, you'll have to reach underneath the layers of fabric and move that zipper pull out of the way when you get to it. Place your working piece down on your surface so that you're looking at the wrong side of the lining piece. We've only attached one lining piece at this point. And then flip just that lining piece open so that you're looking at its right side. I forgot to do it in this video, but you should press that lining piece along the zipper so that it lies flat, and then we'll sew a line of stitching right along the zipper through that lining piece. And here we are with our zipper foot, just sewing really close to the edge where that lining meets the zipper. Now flip the lining piece so that it's on the bottom of the working piece with right side facing down. Then take the left lining piece, so the last lining piece that we haven't attached yet, and align it with the inner edge of the working piece. So the two lining pieces should have right sides facing each other, and then pin or clip down that inner edge. So take it over to your sewing machine, and again with your 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance, you can sew down that inner edge. This time you'll be able to follow that visible stitching line. So again, hard to see here because my thread is so light, but just follow the stitching line that's already there. Next, put your working piece down on your surface and open it up so that the right sides of the main fabric pieces are both facing you, and the two lining pieces are underneath the left side. So they should line up. They don't line up absolutely perfectly. You can kind of wiggle them in together, but more or less you want them to line up. One other important thing to notice is that that left main fabric piece, it is wider than those lining fabric pieces, so it extends a bit on the left edge. That is intentional and perfect, and we want that. The next step will be to sew a line of top stitching through that right main fabric piece just along the zipper. So here we are at our sewing machine with the zipper foot one more time, sewing that line of top stitching. So I said about a minute ago how that left main fabric piece extended out beyond those lining pieces and how that was intentional. So here's where that comes in. We're now going to take that left main fabric piece and align it with those lining fabric pieces. So on the left side here, there's 3 layers of fabric, and on the right side of the zipper, there's only 1 layer of fabric. So we're going to align that left main fabric piece with the 2 lining pieces. Those 2 lining pieces have their right sides together. And then that creates some excess fabric there in the middle. And with that excess fabric, you're just going to fold it over so that it covers the zipper. And it should line up with that top stitching line that we made on the right side of the zipper. If it just barely covers it or lines up with it, that is perfect. So now we're just going to go around the whole left side with some pins or clips to attach that left main fabric piece to those 2 lining pieces underneath it. So again, we have 3 layers of fabric on the left side of the zipper, and we're just going to go around that whole edge with a basting stitch. So you can just use a long stitch on your machine. We're just holding these layers together so that they're easier to work with in the future. So I haven't shown that sewing step, but this is after we've done the basting stitch, and you can just go across the whole front pocket with your iron just to give it a good press. Next, you're going to put that whole front body piece with the pocket, right sides together with the back body piece, and we'll use some pins or clips to secure them together at the outer edges. And now we'll just take that over to our machine and we'll sew down those sides with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. I've just sewn the one side here, but you'll want to repeat this on both sides. Next, press those seam allowances open. I haven't shown the pressing, but there they are pressed open. And then we'll turn that main body right side out. Next, take your side cinch channels and you're going to press one of the short edges under by about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter. Take that over to your machine and just sew those folds down right along the edge. Now you're going to press the long edges of that side cinch channel in towards the center. If you're using a particularly thick cord or something that's flat and wide, maybe, you might want to not press the edges quite to the center. So just leave a little space in the middle, and that way you'll have a little bit more room to sew those channels down without catching the cord underneath. Now unfold those long edges that you just pressed, and then using a tracing wheel or an erasable pen, something that can be removed from the fabric, you're going to mark right down the center on the right side of the fabric. This is because you're going to be sewing down that line in the next step, and it's just easier to see where it is if you've marked it already. Now you're going to align your side cinch channel with the strap opening on the main body. So take the raw edge, not the edge you folded under, and align it at the top strap opening. And you want that center line that you made to line up with that seam between the front and back body. Now take some pins and pin that center line down all the way to the bottom of your side cinch channel. So ideally you want that center line that you marked to line up exactly with the seam between the front and back body. If it's not exactly lined up, it's not a big deal, but that is the goal. Just a note that the cinch channel should be unfolded at this point, so those long edges that you pressed, you shouldn't have them tucked under right now. I apologize that it's kind of hard to see what I'm doing here because my fabric is so patterned, but hopefully this step makes sense. If it doesn't, skip forward a bit to where I actually sew this channel down because I think it's a little bit easier to see. So take that over to your machine. You can see that those long edges of the side cinch channels, they're not tucked under, so I don't want to be catching them in this seam. And I'm going to sew right down the middle along that line that we marked, from the top of the side cinch channel right to the bottom of the side cinch channel. Just a note that it's really easy to catch your other side of your body fabric underneath when you're doing this if you forget to move it. So make sure you lift up your fabric every couple seconds and just double check that you're not catching the other side of the body underneath. Grab your cord or elastic that you're going to be using in your side cinch channels and cut it into two pieces if you haven't already. The measurements are on screen or in your instruction booklet. Take your cord lock as well and slide that to the middle of one of those pieces of cord or elastic. Fold one side of your side cinch channel open, and then take one end of your cord or elastic, and you're going to align it so that it's right under where that channel will be, so really close to the center line, and then about a half an inch or 1.5 centimeters down from that top edge. So take that over to your machine and you're going to sew back and forth across that cord or elastic a whole bunch of times. There's going to be a bunch of stress on this point because that's where you're going to be cinching the sides of the bag from. So you want it to be really secure. So this is just like little teeny back and forth over the cord. And you want to make sure to not catch the actual side cinch channel fabric in there that you have folded back. Take the other side of your cord or elastic, and then you're gonna line it up so that it's even with the first end that you just sewed down, but on the other side of that center line. Also, just a note to double check that your cord isn't all twisted up before we sew this down. So just like the first side, take that over to your sewing machine and sew across the end of the cord a whole bunch of times to make sure that it's really secure, and just be careful not to catch the side cinch channel fabric that you have folded back there. Okay, so now that that cord is secured at the top, we're going to fold the long edges of the cinch channel under and enclose the cord inside the channel. So this step can be a bit finicky, but you're just going to tuck the cord or elastic underneath that free edge of the side cinch channel, and then just go along the whole edge and use that press mark that we made to help turn the edge under. And then use lots of pins to tack it down, making sure that you're not catching the cord with the pins. Also, a note that when you do fold that long edge under, it's totally up to you whether that fold ends up underneath your cord or over top of it. It's just with whichever one you find easier to tack down and get a clean finish. So here I'm just doing the same thing on the other side, turning that edge under and enclosing the cord inside the cinch channel. Now take that over to your machine and use your zipper foot to just sew right along the edge of that cinch channel to tack it down. We're using a zipper foot here just because the cord on the inside of the channel makes it a little bit finicky and it kind of gets in the way. So using the zipper foot allows us to sew right along the edge of the channel. You want to make sure that you're not catching your cord or elastic with your stitches. So here's what it looks like once we have that channel sewed down on both sides. If you haven't already, go ahead and repeat all of the side cinch channel instructions on the other side of your bag. If you're choosing to add extra padding to your strap, whether it's fusible or non-fusible, make sure you've trimmed 3/4 of an inch off of the width and the height of your padding. If you're using fusible padding, you can fuse it right now to the wrong side of one of your strap pieces in the center. So notice how it has this 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter unpadded border on all sides. I apologize, it's a bit hard to see because the padding is white and the wrong side of the fabric is white, but hopefully you get the idea. Now you're going to place your two strap pieces right sides together and pin down one edge. Then take the strap to your machine and sew down that edge with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. If you do have that fusible padding in there, you want to be sewing right along the edge of the padding but not through it. Next, take the strap to your iron and press the seam allowance to one side. Then you're going to turn both of the long edges under by 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter. We're going to add the non-fusible padding at this point if you are using it. So all you're going to do is make sure you have your strip with the 3/4 of an inch or 1 centimeter trimmed off of the width and height, and then you're just going to place it on one side of the strap and tuck it under the folded edge. So if you see here in the video where that fusible padding is, just imagine that you're replacing it with the non-fusible padding. Next, we're just going to close up that strap by folding it wrong sides together. I won't go over all the steps again, but you're just going to repeat those exact same instructions for the strap attachment. Take your strap to your machine and sew that edge closed. So you want to be sewing as close to the edge as you can, about 1/8 of an inch or 3 millimeters is usually pretty good. You want to go down the whole length of the strap. Then you're going to repeat to sew the strap attachment piece closed as well. I recommend adding some additional top stitching to the strap. For example, here I've added 1/8 of an inch on either side of the strap and then 2 more lines down the center equally spaced. You can top stitch as you please, but I think this looks really nice. Now go ahead and grab either your rectangle ring or parachute buckle. Just make sure that whatever you choose is the same width as your strap. So for example, I've chosen the 1.5 inch or 38 millimeter strap option. So my rectangle ring there fits nice. This parachute buckle actually wouldn't fit my strap, but just as an example, you would feed it through one end the same way you would with the rectangle ring. So now I've just clipped the strap attachment piece through that rectangle ring to one of the strap openings, and then I've attached the strap on the other side. It's up to you which side you like facing forward, depends on which shoulder you're gonna wear your bag over. Okay, so now we're at the sewing machine and we're gonna sew that strap attachment to the strap opening about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter away from the edge. So we wanna sew over that seam several times just to make sure it's really secure. And there are a lot of layers to be sewing through here, so just make sure that you sew really slowly and you can always use the hand wheel if you're worried. So repeat that seam to attach the strap on the other side as well. So now we have both the strap attachment and the strap attached to our bag. So now we're going to attach the main fabric bottom to the bag. So the first thing to do is to mark the centers. So here I'm just folding the bottom in half and then making tiny clips at the center line. Turn the main body of the bag inside out, and then line up the side seams in the middle and make small clips at the fold lines to mark the centers on each side of the bag. Now with right sides together, you're going to use those marks that you just made to line up the main body with the bottom panel. So the center marks on the sides of the main body are going to line up with the center marks on the long sides of the bottom. And then the side seams in the main body are going to line up with the center marks on the short sides of the bottom. Okay, so now we need to line up the main body at the corners. So first, you're going to put another clip or two along the straight edges. So mostly just on the long side. And the small size of bag, you might not even need to do this, but just align the pieces at the bottom that are straight. And now for the parts of the main body that need to curve around the bottom corners, we're going to make these little clips. So they can be about 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter apart. Just make sure that they are less than 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter deep because that's our seam allowance. And now using those clips that we've made, it makes it a lot easier for this main body to curve around the corner. So you can use that to kind of pull the main body into the corners and then just use lots of clips to clip it in place. If your fabric has absolutely no stretch, like for example, you're using a ripstop nylon or something like that, you may find it hard to get the body right into the corners, and that's totally fine. Just get it as far as you can and then just trim off a little bit of excess around the corners. Okay, so now you can see I've just gone and used that same method to align the main body at all of the corners. Now we're going to sew around the whole bottom edge. So here we are at the machine, just using a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance to sew around the whole bottom. When you get to the side seams where the cinch channels are, you may need to reach inside the bag and just pull the cord lock out of the way of your presser foot. So take your pocket bag piece and mark that welt pocket rectangle on the wrong side of the pocket bag, and then also fold the pocket bag in half lengthwise and mark the center point. Then you're going to pin the pocket bag to one of the lining body pieces so that right sides are facing. You want the pocket bag to sit in the center of the lining body and about 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters from the top edge. And then just put a couple pins in there to hold it in place. Now take that to your machine and you're going to sew around the whole rectangle that you marked. So notice that we're not sewing down the center line or along those little triangles that we drew into the corners, just around the outer rectangle. When you get to the corners, you can leave the needle down, lift the presser foot, and then just turn the fabric and start sewing the other direction. Now use your seam ripper to rip a small hole along that center line. This makes it easy to stick your scissors in, and then you can cut along the center line. You want to stop cutting when you reach those little triangles that we drew into the corners, and then you want to cut along those triangles into those corners. You want to cut as close to the corner as you can without clipping the stitches. Now you're going to flip the pocket bag through that hole you just made to the wrong side of the lining, and then use your iron to press everything so it lies nice and flat. I find it really helps to first press those seam allowances flat, like I'm doing here in the video. Now we're going to align the zipper in that zipper opening. So if you haven't already trimmed your zipper to the right size, you can do so now. It should be as wide as that pocket bag. Then you want to align the zipper with the hole and pin it from the right side. There are tons of ways to get this zipper lined up properly and held in place, the best of which would probably be hand basting, but my personal preference is to just put a couple of pins in. I find this is an interior pocket zipper and it doesn't bother me too much if it's not perfectly straight, but if it will bother you, then you may want to hand baste the zipper in place before we sew it. So now we're at the machine, and the way I like to do this is to start with the zipper closed. So the zipper tab is at one side, and then I start my presser foot as close to that zipper tab as possible. I sew the three sides of the zipper that I can sew, and then once I get back to the zipper tab, I move it out of the way and finish that last end. Next, flip your piece over so that you're looking at the wrong side, and fold the pocket bag in half so that the right sides are together. Put a couple of pins in it so that it stays in place. Now take it to the machine and sew around those three unfinished edges to close the pocket bag. I use about a 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter seam allowance here as well. Also, just a note that you only want to be sewing through the pocket bag here. You don't want to be sewing through the lining body as well. Lastly, just give your whole pocket bag a nice press so that everything lies flat. First step for the laptop pocket, regardless of whether you're using a fusible padding or a non-fusible padding, is to trim 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters off the width and the height. We're basically just removing the seam allowance so that when we fold this laptop pocket in half, we don't have to sew through a ton of layers of padding. So if you're using a non-fusible padding, like a fleece or quilt batting, for example, in the video here, I'm using fleece. There's just one extra step that we need to do to prepare our laptop pocket before we can continue sewing it as normal. So if you're using a fusible padding, you don't need to do this step and you can just skip forward a bit. So the first thing to do for the non-fusible padding is to just place that padding on top of one of your laptop pocket pieces in the center. So you should see this 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter unpadded border around the whole edge. And that's because we trimmed off that width and height of our padding piece. So I'm just going to put in a ton of pins to hold this in place because we're going to do some quilting, so we don't want it to shift around. Now we're just going to take that to the machine and we're going to sew around the whole border of the padding piece really close to the edge. So about 1/8 of an inch inside the border of the padding piece through both layers just to hold this thing in place on that laptop pocket. So I haven't shown the sewing step, but here's what it'll look like once we've sewn that padding piece down to the laptop pocket. So there's our stitch line and we can see it on the right side of the laptop pocket piece as well. The last thing we're going to do is just sew some quilting lines through the laptop pocket and the padding piece just to reinforce it a little bit more and make sure things don't shift around. So here I've just sewn some vertical lines. They're not very straight. I recommend you make yours straighter, but you can do whatever kind of quilting you want. Okay, so from this point on, the steps are exactly the same whether you used a fusible padding or a non-fusible padding. If you used a fusible padding, like here in the video, you just got to skip those quilting steps. So if you did use a fusible padding, make sure it is fused to the center on the wrong side of one of your laptop pocket pieces. Next, you're going to put both laptop pocket pieces with right sides together and pin them in place. Now you're going to sew around the whole edge with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. So you should basically be sewing right along the edge of your padding, but not through it. You want to sew around all edges except leave a 4 to 5 inch gap in one side because you're going to want to turn this laptop pocket to the right side. Turn the laptop pocket through the gap to turn it to the right side. Then use something dull like a chopstick or a pencil to poke in those corners to make sure they're turned out properly. I forgot to do it in the video, but if you want, you could also trim the seam allowance at the corners to reduce the bulk. Give the whole laptop pocket a good press so that it lies flat. Next, you're going to sew a line of top stitching about 1/4 inch away from the top edge, and you're also going to sew that gap closed. So press the seam allowance under and then just top stitch really close to the edge. So here we are at the sewing machine, just sewing that line of top stitching, and then sewing that gap in the side closed. Next, you're going to mark the center of the laptop pocket, and then you're going to install a snap, a button, or you could use a small Velcro piece about 2 inches or 5 centimeters below the top edge. I'm going to install a snap, but again, you could use a button or a Velcro piece if you prefer. Now we're going to follow a very similar process for the laptop closure tab piece. So again, the first thing to do is to take your padding and trim off the seam allowance around the edges. And then if you're using a non-fusible padding like fleece or quilt batting, you're going to put it on the wrong side of one of those laptop closure tab pieces, and you're just going to sew right along the border of the padding to sew it to the closure tab piece. If you're using fusible padding, you could just go ahead and fuse it right in the center on the wrong side. Then with right sides together, you're just going to sew around the edge of the closure tab on all the sides except the top edge, and you're going to be sewing right along that padding but not through it. Make small clips in the seam allowance around the curved edge of the closure tab, and then use something dull like a chopstick or a pencil to help you turn the closure tab right side out. Then press the closure tab flat. One step I forgot to do in the video here that's totally optional is you can top stitch around the outer edge of that closure tab on all sides if you would like. Now on the end of the closure tab, you're going to install your snap, so a buttonhole, or install your Velcro piece to match whatever you put on the laptop pocket. Lay your laptop pocket centered on your body lining piece about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters below the top edge. If you customize the size of your laptop pocket and it's a lot smaller than this, you can shift it down or really put it wherever you like. Just make sure that when it's folded in half, there's at least 3/4 of an inch or 2 centimeters above the bottom edge of the lining, just so that we have enough room to sew the bottom on. Tuck the raw edge of the closure tab under the top edge of the laptop pocket in the center, and make sure that the top side of that closure tab is facing down. Now we're going to sew the laptop pocket to the lining body piece along the top edge. Then we're going to sew a second line halfway down the pocket. So make sure you mark that halfway point so you know where to sew. So here we are at the sewing machine, just sewing that bottom layer of the laptop pocket down to the body lining. Then we sew a second seam halfway down the laptop pocket, also through the body lining. Now fold the laptop pocket in half and give it a good press. Okay, now not only did I forget to film this next step, I completely forgot to do it. So the next step will be to sew down the right and left side of the laptop pocket through both layers to close that and make it into a pocket. Okay, so now that we have both of the lining body pieces done, one with the zipper pocket and one with the laptop pocket, we're going to put them together with right sides facing and pin down the outer edges. Then we'll take that over to our machine and we'll sew down each of the sides with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Finally, we'll press those seams open. Okay, so we already trimmed the main zipper to the right length at the beginning of this video. If you haven't done that, you can go back there and do that. I will also leave you to go back to that point and attach the zipper tabs to this main zipper. The process is exactly the same as what we did for the front zipper. Then once you have your zipper tabs attached, you're going to fold that main zipper in half and you're going to make small clips at the fold line to mark the center. Then do the same thing with one of the main fabric zip closure pieces. So fold it in half, make a clip at the center to mark the center. Now you're going to pin or clip the main zipper to that main fabric zip closure piece with right sides together. So the zipper tabs should line up with those V cutouts in the zip closure piece. I find it easiest if you align each end, so the zip tabs to those V cutouts first, then you pin the middle, and then you go along the edge and align everything. If you're having a lot of trouble aligning the straight zipper to that curved edge, you can go in with your scissors and just make tiny clips in the zipper tape where it has to curve a little bit, and that will help it curve a bit more. So now we'll take that to our sewing machine, and with our trusty zipper foot, we're going to sew along that zipper as we did in previous steps with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Again, if you can't get the exact seam allowance with your zipper foot, it's not a big deal. And as before, at some point you'll have to move your zipper tab. Here I actually can't even get it past my zipper foot. I'm sewing too close to the zipper, so I had to stop, back stitch, move the zipper tab, and then keep going. Next, you're going to take one of the lining zip closure pieces and you're going to align it with the same edge of the zipper that you just sewed, but you're going to have the right side of that lining fabric facing the wrong side of the zipper. Now you're going to take that to your sewing machine, and if you face it so that the wrong side of the main fabric is facing up, you can actually just follow that same stitch line from the last step. This is kind of what we did when we sewed the front pocket, so just following the existing stitch line to get that 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. Now you can make some small cuts in that seam allowance, especially along the curves, just to help it move a bit better, and then you can turn the pieces so that their wrong sides are together. Give it a press and then take it to your machine and sew a line of top stitching through both the main fabric and the lining layers all along the zipper. So the next thing you're going to do is just follow those exact same steps on the other side of the zipper with the other two zip closure pieces. So first you're going to take that main fabric piece and you're going to align it with right sides together on the other side of the zipper. Then take it to your machine and sew with the zipper foot. Then line up that last lining fabric zip closure piece so that the right side of the lining fabric is facing the wrong side of the zipper. Then take it to your machine and follow that existing stitch line like we did before. Then make those clips along the seam allowance, open up the pieces so that the wrong sides are facing, press, and top stitch down the zipper. Once you finish your top stitching, we're going to take those flappy end pieces and we're going to fold them together so that the right sides of the main fabric pieces are facing, and then the right sides of the lining fabric pieces are facing. And then you're going to pin or clip those along those outer edges. Then repeat on the other side. Now you're going to sew down each of the outer edges with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance. So you're going to be sewing 4 seams in total here, 2 on each side. It's easiest if you start the seam at the top, and then because of the size of those little V cutouts that we had in the zip closure pieces and the width of the seam allowance, your seam should stop right in the point of where those V cutouts were. If it's not exact, again, don't worry, but that is the goal. So when all 4 of those seams are sewn, this is what it should look like. You can see that there's a little gap between the lining pieces and the main fabric pieces. Okay, now you're going to take that to your iron and you're going to press those seam allowances flat. And in doing so, that kind of flappy end bit gets pressed flat against the zipper. So the main fabric piece gets pressed against the top side of the zipper and the lining fabric piece gets pressed against the bottom side of the zipper. This is very confusing to explain and way easier to just see it done. So watch the video and hopefully it makes sense. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is you're just going to pin those together so that the layers stay where they are. And then we're going to take it to our machine and we're going to sew across right there. So right in that little notch between the zipper tape and the folded fabric. The idea being that if we sew across right there, the length of that seam will be the same as the width of the zipper tape. So here we are at the sewing machine, sewing across right where the zipper tape meets that fold. And you just want to make sure that you're sewing through that seam allowance that's pressed open. Now you're going to take that to your iron, open up the main fabric and the lining pieces so that the wrong sides are together, and then just give it a good press. Once you've repeated those steps on both sides, your zipper closure should have this kind of boat shape. Grab your lining body piece with the wrong side facing out, and then you're going to take that zip closure and put it inside the lining body. So it's going to align all along the top edge. Then you're going to take that to your machine and with a basting stitch, so just a long length stitch, you're going to go around the top edge only at about 1/4 of an inch or 1/2 centimeter away from the edge. We're just attaching these two pieces together so that they're easier to work with in the future. I forgot to record the sewing for this step, but this is what it should look like when it's done. Now you're going to grab your main fabric body piece and you're going to have it so that the right side is facing out. Then make sure you open the zipper in the zip closure. And then you're going to put the main fabric body inside of the lining through that zip closure. So again, just like we did with the zip closure and the lining body, the top edges should align all the way around. If you made the laptop pocket, you probably want to put the laptop pocket against the back side of the bag, so with the side without the front pocket. Then take that to your machine and you're going to sew around that whole top edge again, this time with a 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimeter seam allowance and a regular stitch length. It's easy for the fabric to get bunched up underneath as you do this, especially since you're sewing around a lot of curves. So make sure that you lift up your fabric every once in a while and just straighten things out to make sure that you're not sewing through any layers that you don't mean to be. Once that's done, you're just going to take your scissors and you're going to trim the seam allowance at the corners where the straps are. Then make small clips in the seam allowance around the curved edges. This will just help everything lay a bit flatter when we turn everything to the right side. Next, grab the lining fabric bottom panel and using the fold in half method or method of your choosing, mark the centers on each side. Then pull the main fabric body up so that it's out of the way of the lining. Mark the centers on each side of the lining body. To attach the lining bottom, we're going to use the exact same method that we used to attach the main fabric bottom. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take all of those center marks that we just made and line them up. So you should put in 4 clips or pins, one on each side of the bottom. Next, you're going to add a couple more clips or pins along the straight edges. And then in the main body, where it has to curve around the corners, you're going to make those small cuts. And finally, you're going to use those small cuts to pull the lining body into those corners and then use lots of clips or pins to hold it in place. Once you have all 4 sides and all 4 corners aligned, it should look like this. And then we're ready to take that to our machine. So just like we did with the main fabric bottom, you're going to sew around that bottom edge with your 3/8 of an inch, 1 centimeter seam allowance. The only difference between this time and when we sewed the main fabric bottom on is that this time we're going to leave about a 5-inch or 15 centimeter gap, so we won't quite sew around the entire edge. And that gap will be used to turn the bag right side out. Make sure you backstitch at the edges of that gap so that it doesn't come undone when we do turn the bag. I generally start and finish the seam on the side of the bag with the laptop pocket so that that gap ends up underneath the laptop pocket, but it's totally up to you and ultimately doesn't matter that much. Okay, time for what I think is the best part, the big reveal. So you're going to turn the bag right side out by pulling the whole bag through that gap in the lining. This can be a bit tricky to do, so just take your time. Now you're just going to fold the seam allowance under where that gap is and then top stitch the gap closed. If you want a really clean finish, you could blind stitch this by hand, but in my opinion, this goes on the inside of a bag and no one will see it, so it doesn't bother me if there's a little bit of top stitching. So here we are at the machine, just sewing really close to the edge to top stitch that gap closed. Once your bag is fully turned right side out, you can take your iron and just press that whole top edge so that it lies nice and flat. Okay, the last thing we have to do to finish this bag is just finish the strap. So grab your slide adjuster. Hopefully yours is actually the same width as your strap. Mine is a little bit big, but it's all I had on hand. The first thing to do is feed the long end of the strap through the slide adjuster. Then feed the end down through the rectangle ring so that the free end comes out on the bottom. If you used a parachute buckle, the step is exactly the same. You'll just feed it through the other end of the parachute buckle. Next, the end of the strap needs to turn back on itself and feed through the slide adjuster again. You'll have to pull the layer of the strap already going through the adjuster up and out of the way to do this. Again, this is one of those steps that is way easier to see done than to explain. So watch the video and hopefully this makes sense. Finally, you're just going to take that free end and you're going to fold it under by about a 1/2 inch or 1 centimeter. And then you're going to pin it to that bottom layer of strap. You want the folded edge to be close to the slat adjuster, but you do have to still have room for your presser foot to be able to sew it down, so it can't be too close. Then you'll take that to your machine and you'll sew through the end that's folded under and through the bottom layer of strap. So here we are at the machine, sewing down through that fold and through the bottom layer of strap. You can choose to use a straight stitch or a zigzag stitch here.
Okay, so we're finished now. Yay! I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me on Instagram or on Etsy. Happy to help if you ran into any problems. And I would love to see your finished bag on Instagram, so please tag me at GracoMakes and use the hashtag Saturn Sling Bag. Yay! Enjoy your bag!